for a few people to come online, and then we'll get into it. Hopefully someone does join. We've got our first viewers coming on now, which is good. Always nice to know that your gear is set up properly, and something that I've done differently today, because I'm going to ACTU meetings nearly every day, and there's been a bit of a complaint that the camera's been too low and everyone's had to look up my nose, so I've raised it a little bit so that it's at the same level as my eyes. Can someone let me know if you can hear me? And still waiting. If someone could just post that the sound is working okay, and then I'll get stuck into the content. Thanks, Steve. All right, we're good to go then. Alrighty, guys. So today I'm going to talk firstly about the Virgin admin process and how I view it. And look, I should put the usual disclaimer on here that anything I say are just my observations. They're without prejudice. They're off the cuff and hopefully as informative as you guys need it to be. And I'll get to questions and so on at the end of my little talk. Sorry, what was that, Rod? Sounds better than it looks. Okay, all right. Well, we won't worry about the looks. Okay, admin process. Virgin administration. It's a real problem. The airline are clearly in a lot of trouble, and I just want to talk to you all about what is happening with it and where it's likely to go. Okay, so I've got a few running notes here today, which reminds me, I've got to put one thing that I wanted to talk about to the Qantas guys is about the case with the manager. Stand by. Alrighty, so everyone knows that Virgin are in administration, which basically means that the administrators are the ultimate superiors or managers of the company, being Deloitte's. They're in charge of the place at the moment, and they made a decision that they're going to keep the current management team in place for the operation of the airline, which is probably wise of them to do. But Deloitte's, their real goal here is to get through the process to sell Virgin to someone who will buy it. What the purchaser does with Virgin, though, is nothing to do with Deloitte's. Anyone who buys the airline can do as they please with it, and that's what's concerning us. We've seen all of this commentary in the press, in the papers. You can read this, that, and the other, and quite frankly, a lot of that stuff is pretty accurate, actually. And what that sort of says to me is that there's some leaks within the process. I'm going to talk about things generally, but there's some things that are very specific that are coming out in the press which I thought would have been kept confidential. You Virgin guys would have seen that there's another site, VAA Admin, a Facebook site where all employees can talk about all of the issues. I was a little bit disappointed. I got on there about a week or so ago and started talking about things generally that have been said in the press, and I got attacked by a whole bunch of people who is none of our members, so I've decided to withdraw from that process and just not make any comments there. I'll still post information there, but I won't have any commentary or criticism of anything that I do or say. So firstly, we've got the ACTU are in charge of this process, and for those of you who watched, the ACTU did a feedback session a couple of weeks ago with all employees, and quite frankly, I really think the ACTU missed the mark with a lot of their work. The 1 hour session had plenty of information, but really I just saw it as a big sales pitch for unions, and I really think, and I've expressed my views to the ACTU, I think when you've got a whole bunch of employees who've lost their work, it is not time to go and promote and sell unionism and tell them to join unions and be part of this great movement. The ACTU didn't need to do that. The ACTU should have been talking about the admin process itself. People will join unions if they see that the unions are working for them, but not when they're just getting told to join a union, not knowing what they do. That being said, I've never seen the ACTU work so hard on any given issue behind the scenes. We've been meeting nearly every day, and that all the meetings have included the heads of all of the unions involved, which is about 7 or 8 unions, and the ACTU President Michelle O'Neill's been fantastic, being dedicated with all of her work. Like here we are, we've got the head of the ACTU, there's like about 100 unions, and she has been working tirelessly on this behind the scenes. They should be promoting what they do, not telling people to join unions. But through that process, the ACTU have lined up for us, and we had a couple of meetings with the administrator, Vaughan Strawbridge, and I think if I can summarise the way that the meetings with the administrator goes, the questions are asked and the answers are always very evasive. There's never anything as specific as I would like to see when we're in discussions with them. There would be a number of reasons for that. I guess they've got legal obligations, and they're trying to make sure that the best deal for whoever buys the airline is not prejudiced by certain things that are said or things that could come out in the press. So yeah, it's just been a little bit hard to extract any specific details from the administrator when we're talking with them. So there was a point where we as unions wanted to meet with potential buyers and just go to them directly and start asking the real questions, such as how many employees will you have if you're successful in this bid? What routes are you going to keep? And Deloitte's were very reluctant to even allow us to meet with potential buyers. They tried to stop us doing it. In the end, they, I guess, permitted us to meet with buyers. I mean, we would have just bypassed Deloitte's anyway and just rang them and said, hey, what are you going to do with the airline? In the end, Deloitte's facilitated the meetings with some of the potential buyers, but the catch on it was that Deloitte's had to be there, so they were watching everything that we did or what we asked of them, but they didn't really interject or stop us asking questions. But I'm not going to go into any of the specifics about any of the meetings because they were behind closed doors. I'll just be making general comments about the things that have leaked out into the press and things that I feel or see about the process. So I guess the biggest question everyone wants to know is how many people are going to be employed post new ownership of the airline, and that's not determined yet. And the potential buyers, you can imagine, we're all very coy about answering questions about specifics such as that, and it may be for a number of reasons. It may be that they don't want to tell us. It may be that they don't know. It may be that they need more time to assess what the airline's going to look like post-change. And it may be also because of this COVID thing and people don't really know exactly where COVID's going to lead. Everyone sees at the moment that restrictions are starting to be eased, but if cases pick up again, we're going to be in the same boat as we were a month or so ago. So here we've got the main question everyone wants answered, not being really answered by any of the potential buyers, but how I can ask you guys to think about your future and gals as well, of course, is just some general comments that you would expect to hear from someone who's looking at buying an airline. These people are not looking at buying Virgin to have it continually make a loss. It must be profitable. if the new airline is not profitable, or the new owners are not profitable with their ownership of the airline, they won't want to buy it in the first place. That's the first thing. And two, if it continues to run losses as it has in the last 7 or so years, they're going to ditch it and there will be no Virgin. So there's going to be a very close look at all of the routes, the profitable routes and the unprofitable routes. And I would imagine that whoever takes it over is going to want to turf anything that's not making money. And what's making money is something that some of you guys can read about or you can imagine, but my understanding is that routes such as the long-haul international routes have not been profitable, and I would imagine that any owner would not want to continue running something like an international route that continually makes a loss. Just in the questions, and this comes up a bit, is about the smaller ports at Virgin. Again, we don't know what an owner's going to do. They're going to have to make it profitable, but I would dare say that every single route to some of the outstations is going to come under heavy scrutiny as to whether it's viable or not. And it might be whether you're in Cairns or Darwin or Launceston, that the new owner's going to look at those routes. So rather than me tell you if they're going to continue with those routes or not, because I don't know, and I dare say potential new owners don't know yet, it might be wise for those in the smaller stations to start looking at the loads that have been coming in and out of your port and getting that information to me, because as we continue these discussions, it will undoubtedly be raised with us whether a route is profitable or not. And if we have information at hand that shows that we're running 3 flights a day into wherever it may be, the aircraft are 80% full, then we can put it on whoever the new purchaser is that you should keep those routes and your costs are minimal because you've got 2 or 3 lamies there. So that's all we really know about the smaller ports. As for the buyers themselves, I wanted to talk about these groups of companies and what they are, and where they come from, and the process. It's not just 4 people that's going to be whittled down to 2 people on Monday, because I think that's what they're talking about doing. That's what you may be reading in the papers or seeing in the official announcements, but there's a hell of a lot more people or interested parties than 4. The 4 that have been widely spoken about in the press, one of them is called Cyrus, and this is a US-based organisation that has deep roots with Virgin Atlantic, Virgin America. A lot of the executives there come out of the Virgin Group, so they're strongly aligned with the brand. They're fairly well backed financially, certainly better than the Australian bidder, I would imagine. Of course, anything that comes from North America is going to have a lot of money compared to any company in Australia. I guess if Cyrus was successful, you'd probably see a strong focus on Virgin. And just bear in mind, anyone who buys this airline can rename it. They can do whatever they want. They will be the owner, and they probably won't be listed on the stock exchange either. It'll just be 100% ownership by one of these groups, or they might form a partnership and hold hands together to buy it. The next group on the list, the Australian one, BGH Group, which is one of the biggest investment companies in this country. And BGH probably, if I have read correctly in the papers, I want to talk about something specific. They've been linked with comments that says that they're going to start up with only 15 aircraft, then step up to 40, and then go to full operation. That's being said in the papers, and I don't know if it's being characterised correctly. the 15 aircraft that I would imagine they're looking at operating are probably the 15 aircraft that are running around now. There would be about 15 planes with the very reduced operation, and it's a similar proportion of aircraft that are flying in the Qantas network. So the idea of this group being no good because they only want to start with 15 aircraft, that's just because of COVID. It's not their ultimate goal. I think the next phase or step that they're talking about is running a network with 40 aircraft. Of course, well, 40 aircraft's about, no, it's not half the Virgin fleet if you count VARA and the international aircraft, but at the moment I understand, I think there's 78 738s. It's about half the 738s, and as COVID reduces, of course, they're not going to deploy every single aircraft on unprofitable routes. None of the bidders would do that. It is what the situation that faces them that would bring about comments such as 15 aircraft, 40 aircraft, 75 aircraft. The Australian bidders, what else can I say about them? Well, not really too much else. I mean, of course, it would be good to have Virgin in Australian hands, but it may or may not eventuate. Next we've got Bain and Co. And for the Qantas people watching, Bain's been one of those mobs who've come through Qantas and made a whole lot of crazy recommendations about reducing staff, and then they go away and hardly any of it gets introduced. A bit like the Seabury mob who decided that the 380 fleet could be serviced with 24 lamies worldwide. Bain are a big, a larger than Cyrus investment group out of the US as well, and they got offices in Australia and a lot of Aussies involved as well, but essentially the money would come from the land of the free, and they're also tied in with Jane Hardlicker, who's got a lot of experience with low-cost carriers in Australia, obviously being the CEO of Jetstar. I don't think that's a good experience, because if some of the culture from Jetstar is passed on to Virgin, I don't think it will be the airline that we all know and love. But they do have a lot of experience in airlines, and it's not the end of the world if they're your new owners either. It might be the thing that actually saves you in the long run. The next mob on the list that is part of the main four that have been touted in the press is Indigo. And Indigo are an ultra low cost carrier, lots of financial backing, virtually entirely, their investments are virtually entirely based in airlines. So a lot of experience in airlines, but all of those experiences are around a concept that people only consider price when they purchase tickets. And if that concept is one held by a new owner, I would have concerns that they would want to take an axe to the existing structure and leave it nothing more than a shell of what it is. But if they are the new owner, and look, you guys can all read into my comments on who my preference would be, there is no decision or leaning of the ACTU. All individual union leaders may have their different ideas, but at the end of the day, whoever is the new purchaser, we're going to have to work with them. So it's really hard to say too much negative about any of them when we're going to have to form a partnership. The process itself, so you've got Deloitte, they're coordinating, they're like the real estate agent, and they're coordinating the potential buyers, and it's them who have made this decision that they're going to whittle it down to two. It may be that Deloitte think that that's how they can get the best deal for the people who currently have shares or want to sell Virgin, or the creditors or whoever, or the employees. What their motives aren't really clear. But ultimately the decision on who is going to be successful in this process will come down to who has the most proxy votes at the next meeting of creditors. And we went through the process with nomination of proxies before, and our union virtually had every member give their proxy to the ALAEA, which was fantastic. What we then do is pool our votes with the other unions, and then as a group, we're probably the biggest block of voters who are going to make this decision. So there's going to be a lot of water pass between now and the final decision. And of course that means we're going to have to discuss things with potential bidders. Already it's been flagged with me anyway that the serious people who get to the end of the list prior to the decision on who is going to buy the airline, they're probably going to want to be talking to us before they make their decision to buy about reductions in wages and staffing levels. Those discussions haven't started yet, but they are bound to come. Like I said earlier, nobody is going to buy the airline unless they can make a profit, and this is a reality we're going to have to face. What they do in the way of approaching us about cutting costs, we don't exactly know what form or quantity that's going to take, but you guys would have all seen something that I put up about a month ago about a potential buy-in of employees, that is you guys. If we have a position up front where we say we will take, and what I put in the question was 20% pay cut for a share in equity in the new ownership structure, I want to start talking about those things earlier, which we did a month ago, so we can head off at the pass any unchecked demand to cut wages. We've got to be ahead of the game when it comes to those discussions, and again I've put that on the ACTU to do further investigation on them. A lot of these American companies have gone through the process before with employee share ownership, sometimes successful, sometimes not. It is risky. If you give up part of your wage and buy into an airline, if they fold, you've lost everything. But on the flip side, if you don't buy into the airline and don't make a situation available where they're going to make a profit and they fold, you've lost everything. You've lost your job and you've got nothing anyway. So we really have to start making and thinking about those hard decisions now. Talked about for frontline people who have been put up in the press as potential buyers. No, they're not the only ones. A lot of you people who are following this would have heard about a Queensland government bid, and the Queensland government are seriously talking about a buy-in or an investment in the group, and there's a debate between the states about who's going to contribute what level and what they're going to get for it, and it's about moving the head office, whether it's going to stay in Queensland or move to Sydney. The BGH Group are based in Melbourne, so they may want a head office in Melbourne, but I mean anyone who is going to purchase this airline surely would realise it's going to cost a lot of money to move the head office out of Queensland. Personally, I can't see it moving, but the Queensland government will want to secure some sort of an agreement by, I think they were talking about $300 million investment. If that be the case, well then they would have to join with one of the other four potential bidders, and whoever else may join them. Maybe one of the other governments may join them. Certainly the federal government should be, because if the federal government gives some sort of a surety to the potential buyers, it's going to be more likely that they remain open and continue in operation. There's another big investment group that are also sniffing around the edges, been talked about in the papers in the last day or so, and this is a group called Brookfield, and Brookfield are a organisation based in Toronto in Canada, and I use the word Toronto to try and endear myself a bit closer to them, because if you were to say Toronto, it means you wouldn't be actually familiar with how to pronounce the term of their city. They're probably The most financially backed of all of the groups, Brookfield, are huge in North America and Canadian based. The word on the street is that Brookfield, unlike some of the others, some of the other groups are looking to buy in, or generally look to buy into companies to make a very quick profit, and then float a group on the stock exchange so that they can then recoup money. That's not necessarily exactly what's going to happen with any of the other groups, but Brookfield are more of a longer term investor and tend to hold businesses and try and transform them into profitable entities that have ongoing profit for their group. It doesn't mean to say that they wouldn't float it either, but if you look through the list of potential buyers, they're the ones who generally look longer than the others. Of course, as a union, I've spoken to executives from all of these groups just to sound out where they're all at. Again, I'm not going to go into any specifics of anything that was said, but it's really all up in the air at the moment. What we're hearing is on Monday they're going to whittle it down to 2. We've heard that decision's already been made, but I suspect that from next week, the 2 will probably want to engage us about discussions about employee wage levels, amendments to EBAs, employee levels, profitable routes and the like, to assist them with their final decision on whether they're going to purchase or not. The last thing we want to do is see it down to 2 bidders, and at the last minute they say, right, there's no federal government backing, the Queensland government have bailed, and the employees don't move, we're not interested in buying this airline, because then the airline group will collapse. And just finally on the Virgin stuff, before I have a look through, find it somewhere, all the questions that have been asked in the last day or so. VARA and how VARA plays in all of this. Well, VARA, of course, are part of the Virgin Group. There's been no specific commentary about whether VARA would be kept or VARA would be ditched, but VARA are probably the most profitable part of the group at the moment. So if I was working for VARA, I would be quite comfortable where I sat. There's no guarantee on that, but surely if they're considering all of the mining routes out west, the fact that VARA are the ones that are probably still operating half or more of the Virgin fleet at the moment is a good sign for those guys working for the Western Australia offshoot. All right, now I've got to flick through the comments here, and I'm just going to be trying to tackle Virgin specific ones and not those ones about my appearance, which I thought were quite rude. Okay, all clear, yes. Kev Davies, who's our rep at VARA, with regard to the SMH article quoting Cyrus as eliminating fleets, i.e. the Fokkers and the 320s, this is of grave concern to VARA, guys, as this shows that we are well and truly in the firing line. Surely it would be better to argue to sell this unit off separately or gain an understanding of what it does. It is a self-contained unit that, according to the higher powers, makes money if it is bundled into the 7-3 operation and run from Brisbane, or worse still, outsourced to Alliance. Virgin could lose a lucrative income stream. Okay, so yeah, it's just a follow on from what I just sort of said about Virgin. And for those of you who don't know, and I know there's a lot of Qantas guys watching or who will watch the replay, you have Virgin with their 7-3s, you have Tiger with their aircraft, and you've got the international aircraft. VARA run Fokkers and A320s out to the mining companies. Kev, if you're hearing that Cyrus are looking at running a single aircraft type and including that in the VARA operation, I think you would probably find that every single potential buyer is looking at a single aircraft type. Forgetting the Qantas, how they operate, VARA, how they operate, we've all been in the industry long enough to know that the ultimate model is to run with one aircraft type. It's the cheapest because you only have to have one type of LAME, one type of pilot, one type of flight attendant. Your spare aircraft can jump in and out of the operation. Of course, any airline is going to be looking at one aircraft type, but you are correct in saying that VARA could be sold off as a separate entity. We don't know. You're correct in saying it's profitable, and it's probably right also to say that potential buyers haven't even had a look at the exact details. It would have to continue in its current model for some time, I would imagine, and it would be the job of the unions and for you to supply the information to us to make sure that you continue in the form that on aircraft that you guys currently work on. And just for all of you, when it comes to meetings at the ACTU and how we're structuring it, I've been to everyone so far, but if I ever can't get to a meeting, my backup is Chris Tamblin, who's the Virgin counsellor on our federal executive. The next backup in line is Kev Davies, son of Glenn Davies, who a lot of Qantas guys will remember from some infamous incidents, such as throwing tables off hotel balconies onto monorail tracks. So Kev's Glenn's son. Kev's our third backup when it comes to going to meetings and attending, and I'm keeping Kev appraised a bit more than some of the other members. Brendan Ritchie, government has a Bittray site with most figures of flights, not specific to airlines though. The Bittray figures you talk about, Brendan, are tracked by the government, and as you would be aware if you've been on there, they actually track specific routes, and Brendan's in Darwin, and I would say that any LAME in Darwin working for Virgin, of which there are two, would be worried about whether the Darwin route is profitable or not. Mate, go to that Bittray site, and if you look deeper into some of the government statistics, they analyse every route, and whether you're analysing combined Virgin or Qantas passenger numbers, it doesn't really matter. If you can establish from there that a lot of people fly to Darwin, it would help us with some of the upcoming battles. Just got a lot of message. I get a message comes up every time it says someone is watching. Ben Lindsay. If Queensland government want to help, the best thing they could do at the moment is take down their ridiculous border restrictions. Well, look, everyone's got a different view on that, mate. I sit heavily in the camp that we should be protecting lives before we should be protecting the stock exchange. I think border restrictions are there to protect people. They're my personal views. I've had that many debates with members and non-members about this. My big concern for the financial thing about opening that Queensland border is that if we see an increase in cases again because we lift restrictions, that the problem will only get worse and the Queensland border will be closed for a year or so. Where I'm just reading overnight about South Korea, who've lifted restrictions some time ago. They've opened up all of the schools again. They've just seen a spike in their case numbers. So opening a border too early may actually be counterproductive to jobs. We don't know. Of course, no one has a crystal ball, but I guess if you closely monitor some of those countries overseas that are opening up, you can see the impact of what happens if you do. And of course, there's an argument between the Conservatives in this country who want the place open, and the Labor governments who are erring on the side of caution, and I have no doubt they'll both get it wrong. But anyway, hopefully the border opens as soon as it's practically possible and stays open. Brendan again, EBA change is a definite. CEO has stated prior to COVID that expensive EAs were hamstringing the business. I don't fully agree with that. I don't know whether wage levels are that high that is why Virgin aren't making money. I think Virgin being squeezed heavily by Qantas. You only have to have a look at the routes where Qantas compete with Virgin. and the routes where Qantas has free rein. So Qantas has free rein out to some of the smaller outback cities, the rural cities, and the airfares to go to places like I think there was one case that went to the Consumer Commission at it cost like $2,000 to get to Emerald and back from Sydney, and it's cheaper to fly to London. Yet if you have Virgin competing on a route, their airfares are bloody cheap. I think it's a squeeze by Qantas sort of trying to push Virgin out so they can have a monopoly on the market. EBAs and wage levels on comparison to Qantas and Jetstar sit somewhere in the middle. The wages are somewhere in between Qantas and Jetstar. That's where it is. Paul Kennedy, small sports ports specifically. I don't know what I was saying when Paul posted that, but Paul's our rep in Canberra. Canberra is a very large small port of Virgin's, and I would imagine that no matter who buys the airline, that Canberra is going to continue because it has more significance than just how much money you make on the sector. It's how you can suck up to the politicians. Jeremy Burton, redundant licence payment is a joke. There's a good start. Very mindful of that, mate. The buyers are talking about reducing aircraft types. You're going to have less active licences when that happens. For Lamies, as we're talking about reductions in the overall wages bill, we'll be saying, well, here's the EBA. It says you can carry one redundant licence. Anything beyond then, you don't get paid for. There's going to be a pay cut naturally from what's in the current EBA. Hopefully that will be satisfactory to appease any new buyer that, yes, our engineering workforce is having an overall reduction. That's in your EBA now. And when you say it's a joke, I'm not sure what you refer to, but I do recall negotiating the last EBA and how the Embraer licences were going to be lost, and we managed to keep them. The reality of the situation now is if there are less aircraft types, there will be less licence payments, and we won't even have to negotiate. We'll just have to highlight to them and hope they don't come at the axe with us for other things. Brendan, would you say that taking back of VT Lamies in Perth from VARA Camo be setting VARA up for a separate sale? I don't know, mate. And that situation with VARA and the VT Lamies in Perth and who they answer for seems to change by the week. One minute they're answering to VARA, next minute they're answering to VT. Who knows, the VARA guys may answer to VT. It changes all the time. They may be setting it up for a separate sale. What would I do if I was buying Virgin and wanted to make it profitable? I'd probably keep VARA because there's a nice little earner from the outset. And I think if I understand it correctly, VARA fly to some different ports to Qantas, so they've basically got monopolies on those sectors. Luke Goodman's asked for some update on QFEA negotiations. I'll just write it on my list, mate, so that when I get to the QF stuff, I can talk about that. Danielle Fitzpatrick, BGH are linked to the superannuation of the Australian employees. Would you suggest then that they would hold the interests of the Virgin employees higher than other potential buyers? Do you or the ACTU have a preference at this stage? That's from Dean Fitzpatrick, rep in Melbourne. Yeah, BGH are linked to super funds, so they hold a lot of money for Australian superannuants, and they invest it. And of course they have to deliver a return on anything that they invest. Just another thing about the BGH group, they're not entirely linked to Australian super funds. And look, my question for BGH, I can tell you my question when I talk to them. My question was, why would someone holding a whole lot of money in people's superannuation make a risky investment in something like Virgin? And I can't tell you what they said in reply to that, but it is a risky investment buying an airline that hasn't made a profit for so long. BGH would not do this unless they thought they could make money and they will think they can make money if they can secure a deal at the end of it. Just bear in mind though that BGH are not just superannuants from Australia. They're also backed by a group called Temasek Holdings in Singapore. And Temasek, I think they got some arrangement owned by the Singaporean government, and also own or linked with Singapore Airlines, which sort of fits in with the current Velocity arrangement and how you can earn points on Singapore Airlines and interchangeably with Virgin. So there are links there with some of the current owners and superannuation. What was the heart of your question again? That they would hold interests in Virgin. Do you, the ACT, have a preference at this stage? We can't say that we have a preference, mate, because we're going to have to work with whoever buys the airline, and we don't want to sort of have any leanings. We'll make a final decision. Important that we hold our cards close to our chest. Mitch, simplifies redundancies when the time comes, I think, Brendan. Look, redundancies. We had a meeting with Virgin yesterday, and the administrator, they've set up a portal where you can go and view your own redundancy entitlements, and I don't know whether they've sent you guys any information out about that, but next week you should be able to go onto a site and bring up your key in your staff number or whatever it is, and you'll be able to see how much you're entitled to if you aren't still standing at the end of this process. So that's that'll help you make personal decisions as well. Dave Burrell, have you had talks with VT on how they will facilitate redundancies with who get to stay and who gets the boot? No, mate, we haven't. We don't know if people are going to be made redundant out of this. It might be okay. If you had a look at how many lamies or engineers in total Virgin uses compared to Qantas for the same number of aircraft or routes, you have less guys doing the work anyway. They may not look at our heads and say there's an obvious sign for a reduction. Maybe everyone will keep their job. Maybe it might take you guys to agree to some concessions in your EBA. We don't know. I need you guys to think seriously about all of those things though. Probably one thing when I'm thinking about redundancies that I would be mindful of is that the average age of the Virgin engineers are lower than Qantas, and there's a lot of younger guys and less of you that would want to voluntarily take a package at the moment. There's going to be some, but your packages are not the same golden handshake that you get at some legacy carriers. You're not getting the 52 weeks salary. I think you're capped at the Fair Work Act requirements, which is 16 or 18 weeks. There's no big golden handshakes. It's just your entitlements. Some may want to go. You may not need to. We just don't know. And I think that's it for the live questions. Just bear with me for a second. I want to bring up the questions that were posted yesterday, and I'm just going to have to open that page up on my computer. And a lot of our questions come from Andy Curtis. He's my favourite Virgin lamey. Andy and I started together on the same day, and if through this COVID thing, the one thing that I'm looking forward to doing probably more than anything else is getting back up to Bali and having a beer with Andy and Mary Ann. But Andy's questions start. As VA money is getting low, and with the recent Deloitte's email where you can check your claims dashboard. Okay, so it must be released, that thing that they put there. My question is, at what point in time will they be offering members voluntary redundancies and compulsory redundancies? We don't know, mate. We don't know. And look, the way I'm handling this, you guys can see, I haven't read these questions before, so nothing's scripted. It's just all off the cuff. I've already answered that though. Jeff Hyatt from Melbourne. Was the reduction in type allowances agreed to? Well, the reduction in type allowances is in your EBA. You can carry one aircraft type. Anything above that, if you've got 3 or 4 aircraft types and those types go, you can carry one, but no more. Tambo has answered it. Historically, when the company started taking on part-timer, they were paying every allowance at pro rata rate, including permanent night shift. After a lot of negotiation at the time, that was reduced to tight payments. All right, so you guys can read a bit of history on that from Tambo. And Michael Davies, our other counsellor at Virgin, allowances type P&S were always paid when you take leave. Yeah, look, there's some real technicalities in relation to allowances and how they operate, and I'm not going to get down to every clause in the EBA and how they work. Justin Saylor, should your redundancy entitlement be listed in your claims along with long service, annual leave and lieu days? That new portal that you guys are able to access, I think it lists them all separately and then you can add them up. One thing that I didn't see on the portal was your notice period. So I think they've got to give you like 4 or 5 weeks notice. I don't think that was on the portal, but you could probably add that too. But like I said, we don't know if people are going to be made redundant or not. We just don't know. Luke, what criteria are Deloitte using to select the winning bid and how are they weighted? As I said, Deloitte will not select the winning bidder. We will select the winning bidder, that is the people who hold the most votes at an upcoming creditors meeting. Probably with the creditors meeting, it's important to explain there will be a big group of unsecured creditors who hold votes at this who will not want Virgin to continue. They'll just want to sell off the assets and get a portion of what they're owed. We want Virgin to continue, and we need the votes to make sure we outnumber those who just want to get their money and scoot out of the place. The decision on that will be a big decision made at upcoming meetings of creditors. This is why your vote is so important. We don't want the vote to be held by people who just want to run out of there with money. And Luke again, they continue to indicate that keeping as many jobs as possible is a priority and bidders can promise the world, but will any of this be binding? Well, whoever buys it will be the new owner. They can do what they like. Deloitte are selling this to them on the basis that they want it to continue, and I've got no doubt that they want to do this. There's another big group of people who hold votes at this shareholders meeting, and the shareholder process is the current management team. And you guys will have noticed that Paul Scurra was very actively collecting votes at the previous process and got a lot of proxies were in his or in the management team's hands. The management team will want the airline to continue too. They'll vote with us when it comes to selecting a purchaser or a decision on how it's going to work and picking someone who's going to continue. They will agree with us. So they will join our votes. That's all good. They will also exercise their votes to keep themselves as managers. We may or may not agree with that. I don't see any problems with Paul Scurra and what he wants to do at the moment, but who knows what's going to happen in the future. So they'll exercise their voting block to keep them as the management team. We will make a decision on that in the future. And then, at the end of the day, someone may buy the airline, then our voting power is lost, control is completely with them. They might decide to piss off the current managers, they may decide to keep them, but at the moment, the administrator, the management team and the union groups, our number one priority is to keep Virgin alive and to keep as many jobs going as possible. The decision on the jobs will be made by the buyer. A question about GA from Aaron Smith, which I'll just touch on at the moment. And look, it's a lot harder for. I'll explain the structure of the ALAEA and how we work at the moment. I being the Federal Secretary, I have oversight of everything, but I can't possibly have an in-depth understanding of every single matter that is currently being worked on. I stick probably the area where I do most work is Virgin, and I negotiate all of the EBAs as the Federal Secretary. We've got 20 or so airlines that we cater for. We have staff that do that. Noel Spears is our industrial officer who's assigned to all of our GA and smaller airlines, and I'll ask him to do one of those sessions. It may be very difficult because there might be only 2 or 3 people from every company that are on there asking questions, or there may only be a small thing that he can talk about for each. But yes, it's probably timely we did something similar for GA, and I'll talk to Noel about how we structure that. Of course, I don't just do Virgin by myself. I have Glyn Souter, our industrial officer who lives in Brisbane, who assists, and we've got Sean Morgan, our legal officer, who I guess primarily works on Qantas matters, but sort of coordinates all our legal affairs. And then we've got Brad Stewart, who is Melbourne-based and is not a traditional industrial officer or with legal background. Brad comes out of the AMW is more of an organiser, a person who coordinates people and talks to them, does things that I can't do. Brad also looks after smaller airlines like Hawker Pacific and East Sail, and works probably closer with Noel on some of those other matters. Brad also is our first point of call for Jetstar matters. Back to Virgin issues, and some more questions from my mate Andy. With the new owners, what ratio of aircraft to ALAEAs will be the minimum requirement? Who knows? We reckon they're pretty lean on the ground at the moment with ALAEAs, and the operation's pretty streamlined. Ratio may be something that Castle looks at. The new owner would probably have to enter some discussions with Castle. We can assist them with that. But we have a look at, as you Virgin guys know, there's a minimum numbers are set in nearly every port. We believe that those minimum numbers, which were set in 2010, are probably the bare minimum you need anyway, because flights increased after 2010 and those numbers were kept the same. We'll be pressing a very strong case for the minimum numbers to stay as were. Will the maintenance be done in Australia or abroad? It's the heavy maintenance done abroad now, but there are opportunities to do maintenance in Australia. If you're down to one fleet, it may be that the 777s go, the 330s go, 738s stay at their same level, and consequently, as a result in a reduction of ALAEAs working on long-haul flights, we may be able to sell to them an idea that it's better off to do heavy maintenance in a Brisbane or Melbourne hangar, and all of those things are up for grabs, and we would need to obviously demonstrate to them that it's cheaper and more efficient for them to do it in Australia. Then you have the VARA situation. VARA aircraft from times have been, my understanding, and Kev will correct me if I'm wrong here, at times VARA have done heavy maintenance checks in Perth, at times they haven't. Again, it may be opportune for us to highlight that we do have enough people capable of undertaking that, and you can keep money inside the company by doing that work in Australia. What discussions have been said about our hangars? Will we be using them with all the new owners? Just simply back to the Virgin situation is the work that's done in the hangars in Brisbane at the moment can't be shipped offshore. It's all the lighter checks. It's not C checks. So I would imagine if the aircraft levels stay the same, the number of employees in the sheds would stay the same. So all right. Well, they're all the Virgin questions that were posted from yesterday. Just flick back quickly through and see if there's anything more Virgin orientated before I start talking about Qantas matters. So from Mitch Gallagher, our rep in Perth, the portal is live. All it shows is outstanding annual leave and long service leave, no redundancy calculation. I thought from the demonstration that was shown to me a redundancy calculation would be there. I think the EBA says 16 weeks, so you can add 16 weeks pay for your redundancy payment for most of you. I think if you've been there 10 years, I think a lot of you would qualify for the maximum amount. It's in the Fair Work Act as well. Carl Walquist from Darwin as well. The Deloitte's portal only shows your annual leave and long service leave, not redundancy. Okay, you will get paid your redundancy if you are no longer working with them. If creditors get the chance to vote on preferred buyer, why haven't we been involved in the shortlist process? I don't know what that means, the shortlist process, but what I can explain to you is that there has been one creditors meeting, a meeting where decisions were made. The one creditors meeting decided to approve or to not ditch Deloitte as the administrator. That was a decision that could have been made. The second decision made at the first creditors meeting was the appointment of a committee of inspection, and a committee of inspection is a smaller list. There's like 100 or thereabouts creditors, a smaller list of 30 odd that would be involved in a deeper inspection and have access to more documents than the wider creditors. That committee of management decision was made a couple of days after the first creditors meeting. I'm and the ALAEA are on the shorter list of the committee of inspection. Each union is on there, and some others. So the shortlist process, I'm not exactly what you're talking about, but the next creditors meeting is where big decisions will be made, and it is scheduled, I don't know, for another things in about 6 weeks' time. There will be a new proxy process for appointing people to vote for you at that meeting, which is the real important one, where we need to make sure that unions have as much of that voting block as possible, so that we can make the right decision. And don't ask me what the right decision is right now, because I don't know what the shortlist is. But anyway, Kev Davies, VARA is all at Singapore now. Our issue in hangars in Perth, but could be done in Melbourne or elsewhere. Maybe. I think I remember something about a blow-up hangar that you used to have over there as well. Maybe that could be used. Who knows? Admire Reduvo. G'day, Steve. What's the go with VARA fleet? Are we going to keep both 320 and F100? What is the management or the vibe from meetings? Both of those aircrafts work well in VARA. Yeah, I've spoken about this. You might have come on a bit later, mate. We don't know what aircraft they're going to keep. A lot of discussion in the press about one aircraft type, and that's how you make an airline streamlined. I guess that's the ultimate streamlining, is one aircraft type. Who knows, they might sell off VARA as a separate entity. They might keep the aircraft. We'll continue to impress upon them that those aircraft are working well on those profitable sectors. So the owners, the new ones, who knows what they're going to do, mate, but we'll be pressing to make sure that you're all kept in a job. Reduction of the buyers pool. Yeah, okay, now I understand, Dean, your original question about shortlisting the process. Reduction of the buyers pool is a decision that's solely made by the administrator. They're deciding, so how it works is this. As the real estate agent for this process, they're deciding that, I guess in real estate terms, if you're not shortlisted, we're no longer going to show you through the house. We're only going to show you through the house if you're our two preferred bidders. The shortlisted bidders, they will decide, and I think it's announced on Monday. We don't have anything to do with that. That's their decision. They can shortlist bidders, but that doesn't mean those two are the only ones still in it. That just means they're the only ones who aren't being shown through the house anymore. The other bidders might join with two that are shortlisted. They might team up and become the new potential buyers and think that they have enough information now. This shortlisting of bidders is just something the admins are doing, and for good or for bad, maybe they shouldn't do it. Maybe they should just keep all bidders open. Why they're doing it, I don't know. But no, we don't have any say in it. And from that, I think that ends the number of Virgin matters that I had on all of my lists to talk about. So all of my written list. Yep, that covers it off. So I'll move on to Qantas matters. Virgin guys, hang on. If you want to watch this section, or go swimming if you're from Queensland, or ice skating if you're from Melbourne. Some of the things I say in the Qantas section may be handy for you, or give you a bit of an understanding of wider issues too. All right, now Qantas guys, I don't get involved in the day-to-day hands-on issues of the payroll matters, the underpayments. I don't know too much about the JobKeeper matters and how they're playing out. We have 20 or 30 inquiries every day. I didn't get paid this, or my pay level was that. If I was to stick my fingers in the pie into 5 or 6 of those issues, that would knock me out for all of the other important work that needs to be done. So Rod Wise is in charge of dealing with those day-to-day payroll issues, being assisted by Brad Cox from our executive, Chris Burley and others who are working their butts off addressing the day-to-day issues. I'm working on issues that have wider relevance to wider groups. So we're trying to use our resources in that order. So for that reason, I just want to talk to you about court cases and where they're at, and some frustrations which some of you may be having in relation to this big stand down case that I've been banging on about in every video. I just wanted to show you some things to demonstrate and talk about where we're at with it. And bear with me, I just want to open up my computer and read from you a court, just part of a decision from a court case. And just again, simply, we've been saying it all along, and this is Qantas, when I say Qantas, Qantas Group, Jetstar as well, and for any Qantas Link guys that are watching, equally as applicable to Qantas Link in Tamworth, where you guys have been told that you're sent down as well. Don't worry if I just talk about Qantas. Anything that we do in this space, it could just be for one member of Qantas. It sets a precedent for everyone. So Qantas Link guys, it applies to you too. The case itself I've spoken about, it's just simply, if they've got work for you to do, they can't stand you down. The Fair Work Act says you can be stand down if there's no useful employment. Our EBA says the same. We raised it with them from the very first day. We think what they're doing is illegal. We need to prove it in a courtroom, and proving something in a courtroom against Qantas is very difficult because they have squillions of dollars they throw at these court cases. It's incredible how undermanned we are compared to them, and we're using a barrister for all our presentations at the moment. But I just wanted to read to you guys from a decision from many years ago. It's Townsend versus General Motors. Oh, I lost my page. I just got to make sure I get to the correct paragraph. Stand by, guys. So the way that the courts work is you have the Fair Work Commission, and the Fair Work Commission, just bear with me. I've just got to read the appropriate section out to you guys because it'll give you an understanding. So the Fair Work Commission is where most matters are heard, and there's legal requirements and things that have to occur in a courtroom. So with a court case, a single judge in the Fair Work Commission is not permitted to overturn a decision previously made by a full bench of the Fair Work Commission. And our full bench of the Fair Work Commission is usually 3 Fair Work Commissioners. And if the Fair Work Commissioners decide that a certain law applies in a certain way, then when you go before a single judge, they can't overturn that and change what 3 judges have decided. And the Australian law works in this way. It's about laws are written up in the Fair Work Act, and they're written in various other statutes and into enterprise agreements. And so you have a law that says if a person cannot be usefully employed, you can stand them down without pay. So that's what the Act basically says. That's all it says though, really. And there is what is useful employment? Useful employment is not defined in the Fair Work Act. And the court's decision isn't if the act's been applied correctly, it's about what does useful employment mean? There's no definition, so the courts have to make up a definition in the case. So in the case of the definition of useful work, it's been made up by past cases, and the full bench of the Fair Work Commission, they're also bound. If a higher court, like the federal court, makes a decision, a full bench of the Fair Work Commission can't overturn it. If the federal court makes a decision, it can be overturned by the High Court, and the High Court can make the final decision. But generally, a federal court decision is pretty binding if it's by a full bench of the federal court. And I'm going to read to you one of those decisions, just part of, I think it's like a 70-page document, but just to give you a taste of what a case and the definition of useful work is all about. Forget some of the specifics. Again, am I reading the right paragraph or not? I'll just make a bit of a start on some of this, and you'll get a taste of what the case is about. The other category of work that could have been usefully performed on the 10th and 11th of March was the shipping of parts from the central warehouse to other locations. At least one man, Mr. Robbiano, worked on those days attending to urgent shipping work. Mr. Trow agreed that there was also non-urgent work which could have been done on those days. He agreed that it was work which had to be done after the stand down, but said that it was not urgent that it be done or performed on the 10th or 11th of March. There is evidence that on the 12th of March, some 300 containers of parts were shipped from the warehouse compared with the normal daily tally of 200. There was a continuing need to ship parts out of places such as Acacia Ridge, where GMH Gemini vehicles were assembled. In my opinion, there would have been useful shipping work which could have been performed by some employees on the 10th and 11th of March. The evidence does not enable me to identify the names of such employees. However, it appears from Mr. Johnson's evidence that some 3 storeman drivers, 3 storemen and 1 leading hand were engaged in this class of work and that they were stood down. In my opinion, the standing down of those employees was not justified. So to translate it into aircraft maintenance, there is some work that can be done. It doesn't necessarily need to be urgent, but if that work was going to be done a few days later, it could have been done on the days that you were stood down. The precedent has been set in a higher court, and the Fair Work Commission would not be allowed to overturn that decision because we are using this case as our example, or one of them, of what a definition of useful work is. So that's just one element of our case. When we first lodged it, there were 2 elements, and we only needed to prove one of them to prove that you guys were not lawfully stood down. And the second element of that was that there was no stoppage of the airline that was out of control of the airline's decision-making process. That is, the airline decided to stop flying and it was within their control. They could have kept on flying, there mightn't have been many passengers, but at the end of the day, why should the employees bear the burden of a loss of income for the business? Why should we bear the risk as employees of that? Employees don't share in the rewards of massive profits. Why should we have to share in the downturn? And we say the Fair Work Act doesn't permit the airline to say, we've got less customers, we're just going to stop paying you for a while. So that element of our case is called the stoppage element. We've got the useful work element and we've got the stoppage element. There's a big contest about the stoppage element too. And the airline are saying, hey, hang about, the stoppage element, that has massive implications. If the ALAEA are successful on the stoppage element, that means 30,000 employees who've all been stood down. That means it equally applies to any one of them. If we lose the case and the judge says, yeah, Qantas, you decided to stop your airline yourself, you didn't have to stop it, that means that every single employee will have to be repaid their stand-down money. The useful work aspect, whereas it only applies to the engineers, that doesn't have as significant consequences as the stoppage element. But if the stoppage element is successful, it applies to 30,000 employees. But if you think about it, applies to every worker in this country. Just bear with me for a second. I'm just going to get a glass of water. Sorry everyone, Michelle's not here to feed me drinks and cups of tea at the moment, so I'll have to do it myself. The stoppage element can flow on to every single worker in this country. If it gets handed down in a decision that Qantas decided to stop their airline, it wasn't outside their control, it may apply to every restaurant owner in this country. I've closed down my restaurant and laid off all my staff. If they are forced to pay back all of their staff because of a decision that relates solely to us, it will have massive implications for the country. It would go to the High Court, I would imagine anyway. So we were the first union to lodge a dispute of this nature in the Fair Work Commission, and now there's a whole bunch of other cases have flowed. Others have submitted similar cases. All of their cases are waiting on our decision and what happens with us, because it has wider implications for them. So every case in Australia is being stopped at the moment as we argue our matter. And our matter's been pinging back and forwards between the Federal Court and the Fair Work Commission. And look, you might ask, why am I explaining all this? I'm explaining all this because you guys are generally thinking, oh, why is this taking so long? This is explaining why. There's a third element of our case that is being decided and considered by the courts, is called the jurisdictional element. The jurisdictional element is a defence that Qantas are putting up against our arguments, in that we didn't explain to them properly the dispute and walk through to the dispute settlement procedure literally. So the dispute settlement procedure says that if you have a dispute, you have to go to your supervisor, and if you can't resolve it with your supervisor, then you raise it with senior management. So Qantas is saying none of these disputes were raised with supervisors. Well, we don't think that was the case. We say it was raised with supervisors, and they're trying to say that it wasn't. And I'm not going to jeopardise that case by going into great details on that at the moment. But I just want to explain how ridiculous this whole concept is. So an airline has a dispute with us. I don't know, maybe it might be that they've decided to sack everyone. And it was illegal because they didn't go through a redundancy process. What the airline is saying is, oh, we can't talk to you about those issues or that dispute of us illegally sacking everyone until you talk to a supervisor. So if they're gonna win this argument and ultimately get a court decision that says, oh no, you have to go to your supervisor first, I would imagine every single lamey would go to their supervisor and say, oh, I was sacked illegally and they didn't go through a VR process. I imagine the supervisor, who is in the same boat because he's about to get sacked too, would just turn around to the lamey and say, oh, don't worry, the dispute's resolved. Qantas have decided not to sack you. It's illegal. So we would be the deciders of our own destiny if they're going to force us to do this. But nonetheless, Qantas, with their army of lawyers and experts, are running every single little technical debate to try and avoid getting to an answer to the substantive issues that we want to press, which is the stoppage was within your control, so therefore you can't do this. And then we've got plenty of work to do, so you couldn't stand us down. They do not want to get to an answer to those questions because what I read you from Townsend versus General Motors Holden would have to apply, and we are hoping that you would have to be paid. Their first trick in the courts was, so we're in the Fair Work Commission, their first trick was to say that the Fair Work Commission can't make a decision because there is another case in the federal court for the same matter, and we have to decide which court it's going to be in. And our response to that was, it's not in another court. What do you mean there's a conflict between the federal court and the Fair Work Commission making a decision? And they said, oh, it's not in the federal court yet, but we're going to apply. So they're arguing that it's been contested by two different courts, and they hadn't even submitted an application. But of course they submitted it now, which is a development since I last did one of those videos. And now it is in two courts, and the courts had to make a decision on which court it was going to be heard. And again, it's three distinct elements: the jurisdictional matter, did we follow the dispute settlements procedure, the stoppage element, and the useful work element. The federal court made a decision, was it earlier this week or the week before? And the decision's not really clear. The decision said that the jurisdictional matter would be heard by the federal court. But it didn't really say about the other two issues, and honestly we don't know what the federal court's decided, and I'm not going to talk more about that, about what we think. But the first matter of jurisdiction has already gone to the federal court before Justice Flick. Was it yesterday or the day before? No, I'll lose track of the days. But later in the week, it went to Justice Flick for a hearing, and the matters that were being discussed were so technical and detailed that it's crazy. So I just want to talk to you about what is being argued. What was being argued in the courts a couple of days ago was called consent orders, and it's consent orders about what the timeline of the case. So the case is going to be the first case about whether we follow the dispute settlement procedure or not. And I've got a thing here which will show you. Just make sure I get that one right and that one right. It's about the case itself. So we go into the federal court, and one is a copy of our proposed orders, and one is a copy of Qantas's proposed orders. And I want to read these so you understand. So we were in there for a couple of hours arguing about what date the matter would be heard. So Qantas's proposed consent orders, and it's read as Qantas Airways Limited and another being Jetstar. They say by the close of business 5th of June, the first respondent make discovery on any notes or other record referred to in the meeting. I'll come back to that discovery thing in a second. By close of business 10th of June, the applicants file and serve their evidence. By close of business the 18th of June, the respondent file and serve evidence. By close of business 25th of June, the applicants file and serve further evidence. By close of business 29th of June, the applicants insert an outline of submissions. By close of business 6th of July, the respondent file and serve their outline of submissions and objections. By close of business 9th of July, the applications file and serve an application book. And the matter go down for a 2-day hearing starting on the 16th of July. That's what Qantas wanted. We wanted, by close of business 1 June, the applicants file their submissions. 5th of June, the respondent file. By the 8th of June, the applicants file and serve an outline of submissions. By midday on the 10th, the respondent file and serve a list of objections. By midday on the 10th, the applicants file an application book, and they matter go down for a 1 or 2 day hearing on the 11th and 12th of June. So here we've got 2 different processes mapping out what should happen. We want a hearing on the 11th or 12th of June. The company want to push all of that out to the 16th of July. So they're trying to expand every single step of the way so that the whole thing can be postponed and everyone can be held up and not paid. We want to get to an answer as soon as possible, and we're a long way off getting to an answer because you guys will now be able to understand how complicated these cases are. So a couple of hours debate about these 2 consent orders before Justice Flick this week, and the decision was, and if I some of the arguments put were quite interesting to watch play out. Our barrister versus their QC, they were saying that they need time. They need time to subpoena all of our personal notes from the meetings to see when it was, when we raised certain matters with them. They produced in one of the earlier cases some handwritten notes as part of their evidence from one of their managers, Peter Smith. What I put to you is one, I think it went for another page of notes, scribbled notes for a 1 hour meeting that were so unprofessional, it makes them look like idiots. And we've got all these really good notes. We keep notes from our meetings religiously. Usually I have Glenn Souter, our industrial officer, writing down everything as it's said, and then we produce a proper set of notes. Now they want to waste time by subpoenaing the handwritten version of our notes as opposed to the typed out version from meetings, because they've been embarrassed because their head industrial officer has just a 1 page or 1.5 page note of scribble. So big arguments in the commission about in the federal court about these matters on later last week. Justice Flick has handed down his decision. They wanted 16th of July for a hearing. We wanted the 11th or 12th. It's going to be heard on 2 days around the 19th of June. So it wasn't the extra month that they wanted. It wasn't the exact date we wanted. It was 1 week more. And the Justice Flick was actually quite harsh on Qantas when he was talking about things. He was talking about some justice who had passed away at some period, and how he talked about rigorous timelines and how that it's not beyond. Qantas actually said, "Well, it's going to be almost impossible to meet that deadline, Your Honour." And the judge said, "Note, you said almost impossible. That means it is possible." So there you go. So the very first element of it's going to be talked about and decided not too much after the 19th of June. Now, where are all my bloody notes gone? I've got paperwork everywhere here as I'm showing things to you. The judge that we've been handed, Justice Flick, it's not proper for me to talk about any leanings of judges here, and I have no doubt that the decisions that will be made will be strictly in accordance with the laws. All I can do is have a look at some recent decisions that he made. We had Justice Flick in a Qantas matter earlier this year, and he ruled against us. He ruled against us in relation to outside training, external training. He ruled against us, and we went to a full bench of the federal court, and they reviewed Justice Flick's decision, and they decided that Justice Flick had made errors in his decision, but they didn't overrule the overall outcome of that. Justice Flick also was the judge, I believe, and if someone corrects me if I'm wrong, because I'm just trying to do this from the top of my head. Justice Flick was the judge who decided the sick leave case that was in the papers a couple of weeks ago about whether you can take sick leave whether you stood down. Justice Flick ruled against the unions there and decided, no, if you stood down, there's no work for you to do, so you can't take sick leave. Some of the decisions from Justice Flick have gone against unions recently, but I've got so much confidence in our barrister that we use. Lucy, she is amazing. You see, I think I forwarded some of her written work, and she's so good. She's going to be a federal court judge very shortly, and we just got to make the most of her while we can. Matters are being decided before Justice Flick. The stoppage and whether there's useful work may be sent back down to the Fair Work Commission for a decision, but there's a whole lot of unions waiting to see what happens with our outcome. It might be the whole lot might be decided before Justice Flick. Questions about cases and Qantas stuff. Sorry, I'll just go and have a look at back on my computer and see what Qantas related questions came up yesterday. And there's some different matters aside from the court case that is just getting very complicated that you guys have raised on here. Look, one question from Peter Vince. Peter Vince actually used to be on our federal executive. He's in Singapore now, working for Singapore Airlines. I put in there that this meeting would be run Carlton time. Peter Vince, I worked with for many years, has said Carlton time with a bit of a smile, and as most people would know, Peter's a Collingwood supporter. He's actually followed it up by saying, Steve, look, I've been Collingwood all of my life, but I realise now that they're a very ordinary football team, and I would like to change to Carlton. Can you give me any advice? My advice to you, Peter, is change now. Carlton are only one game out of the 8, and if you get on board, it's probably a good time. So thank you for that question about how to change, become a Carlton supporter, Peter. What else have we got here? John Chembry, planner up in Qantas Heavy Maintenance in Brisbane. Are discussions about heavy maintenance on the agenda? Heavy maintenance ties in with all of this court case. John, you would have seen a lot of the planning and internal stuff that takes place in relation to the work. Heavy maintenance had a break for a week or two, and everyone was stood down, and then they come back to work, and basically they're working at full strength at the moment. An aircraft has since been sent to Singapore for, I believe, a C check and a repaint, and in line with that GMH decision, we say that is useful work that could be done. That plane could have been done in the couple of weeks that you guys were stood down, and which means if we can establish that in the courtroom through our court cases, it means they are legally forced you to take leave or have no pay during the period of stand down and should be paid. I think John's question goes a bit deeper though. I think John's question is about 787 maintenance and the longer term plans of Qantas and where they're going to undertake that work. And look, we negotiated a 787 agreement for licence payments. We got 5 points for it. The payoff for that was we had to agree that at terminals that baggage handlers would do the transit work. We knew that would be a bit of a hodgepodge situation even if we agreed to it, and it wouldn't lead to any significant reduction in work or staff. Our federal executive were split on that decision on whether we should agree to that process or not, but there was one element of the 7A decision a couple of years ago that we pressed all along was 787 heavy maintenance should be in Australia. The 787 question a couple of years ago was never incorporated into the final outcome of the 787 agreement entered into by the ALAEA and Qantas, and that question was all open. It was to my surprise, a few weeks ago when I found out that here we have so many members stood down, so much work that we could be doing, and they're making plans for work to be done up in Hong Kong on 787s later this year. C-checks that were not meant to be due for 10 years and all of a sudden are due a hell of a lot earlier. This is not a very good look for the airline. I will make the most of this in the press because I think a lot of those questions about keeping things within Australia are now front and centre. Qantas want to keep pushing to do maintenance in what is now China. Hong Kong is China. It won't be well received, and when people aren't being offered work here in Australia and they're doing that, not only would be illegal, I think, it would be unethical. And John, I think that goes a bit further, or to some of the issues that you wanted to know about. What else have we got here from Qantas employees? Steve Fatoulis. What has been QF's argument for our stand downs and their response to our claim? Also legally, what's the difference between the Fair Work Commission and the Federal Court? I've talked about a lot of that stuff. It's basically about the standing of court cases and what precedents they have to follow. That case that I read out, GMH case, that was in the Federal Court. So if we're heard in the Fair Work Commission, no commissioner is allowed to overturn that principle. The principle, if there's work, you have to give it to them. They can't overturn that. If it goes to the Federal Court, it gets a bit more complicated with whether it was a full bench decision and just opening it. I'm not going to go through the case and see if it was a full bench decision or not. A single judge could overturn it, but he'd have to have very good reasons. A full bench of the Federal Court could overturn it if it's a single judge decision. High Court can overturn it. There's a whole lot more complications with Federal Court cases. The other thing with the Federal Court cases is that the rules of evidence are a lot stricter. So while this matter was in the Fair Work Commission, I did a statement. In the Fair Work Commission, you do a statement. In the Federal Court, you do an affidavit. An affidavit has more legal standing than a statement. A statement, though, is adequate for the Fair Work Commission. The Fair Work Commission also has a thing in that they don't necessarily have to abide by the strict rules of evidence. The Federal Court must abide by the strict rules of evidence. So an example of that is in my Fair Work Commission statement, I might say that some notes were taken by Rodney Wise, and in the notes we recorded that this was said. In the Fair Work Commission, that would probably have standing, but in the Federal Court, there would be an argument, and every time we enter an argument or a debate on something like this, it could actually put the process back a day or a week. It would be argued that this is hearsay. This is hearsay because Mr. Purvinas didn't take those notes or write that down. It was taken down by Mr. Wise. The union need to put on evidence in strict rules that accord the Federal Court process. They need to put on an affidavit by Mr. Wise to say, I took down these notes, rather than Mr. Purvinas saying he took down those notes and I refer to them. So there's some technicalities involved with that, and that is one of the difference between the Fair Work Commission and the Federal Court. There are so many more, but that's a clear one that I can talk to you about. On my list of things to talk about, I've talked about why this decision is taking so long, why it's so complicated, the three elements of the case. I want to talk to you about another case that was reported in the press a few weeks ago. And I don't like how Qantas and the whole group does their industrial relations. I think they are an unethical and evil business. I think greed is their entire motivation. I think that the senior levels of management are cutting everyone off from their income at the moment and saying, we're going to take pay cuts too. I'm not going to have a 24 million salary this year. I'm going to have no pay for a while. I think that's disingenuous, and they're going to give themselves massive bonuses down the track. And something that I saw in the last week or two is really, really winding me up. And it relates to a case that was in the Fair Work Commission. Some manager, individual, it appears, I don't know too much about the case, I heard about it reported in the press and I've read bits and pieces, has said that Qantas aren't doing things properly to me. This is the manager. Qantas aren't doing things properly to me. I'm a monthly paid salary and they've spread I'm coming into work for periods and then getting my pay spread out over the entire month so that they can say on that JobKeeper fortnight I was paid X amount and on another JobKeeper fortnight I was paid X amount, so I never get access to my JobKeeper allowance. And rather than pay this manager properly for the weeks that he was working, they were spreading it out over a period so Qantas could keep the JobKeeper payment. And this went to the Fair Work Commission. Fair Work Commission actually ruled in favour of the Qantas manager. They ruled against Qantas and said, you can't do this. And I thought, great, we've got a decision that favours a worker. And just bear in mind, a lot of managers, even the engineering managers that I don't think much of in engineering, a lot of the engineering managers are people trying to earn a wage too, and they're pissed off about how they get treated. It was great to have a decision go in favour of a Qantas manager. But what do Qantas say about this? We're going to challenge it. We're going to challenge it. I don't know whether they're going to a full bench of the Fair Work Commission. And I'm going to pay this bloke properly. They're just going to drag out the legal process against an individual who just wants to get paid his JobKeeper allowance. That alone is bad enough. That's the kind of thing they do to us all of the time as a union. We raise an issue. It doesn't matter how significant or widespread it is, whether it's for one individual, for every single employee, they just drag out the legal process because they're trying to drag money out of the union so that we can't challenge anything. But doing it to an individual is just really poor. But then I've heard over the last few days this concept of standing down managers, just having them work for a little bit and then stood down for a little bit. They're stretching their payout over a period so that they can keep the JobKeeper allowance. It is so unethical and it is so wrong to the Qantas managers. All of these managers have been told, sign an individual contract to allow us to do this. It is disgusting, absolutely disgusting how they're treating Qantas managers. And I hope some of these managers are watching this and let them know that we're all workers in this together and you need to stand up. And I know very well that Qantas is saying to these people, you make a stand, you're off to the railways. I know they're saying this stuff to them. I've spoken to managers who are under these individual pressures. They know they won't have a job if they challenge. And it is illegal, it is unethical. It's been proven now in one court case. And Qantas have got their bloody lapdogs and others out and just, we'll go to a higher court. Absolutely disgusted. We go through that process as a group, but it's just really, really disappointing when individuals have to go through it. Had a question just up through the chat about the Qantas EA and what's going on with the Qantas EA. The Qantas EA... before the COVID thing really took hold, our executive made a very hard decision to go back to Qantas and say, you give us your 3% bare bones deal. We reckon our members would probably accept it. And at that time, that decision was made knowing that COVID was coming up. I mean, it was probably a stage where there's a lot of turmoil in China. Things had just started to hit the USA and Italy and Spain. We could see troubled waters ahead. We thought, let's just get a 3% deal and get through this process. There were behind the scenes discussions and that was all on the cards. And all of a sudden, Qantas didn't want to meet with us or talk to us about any of this. We don't know exactly what they're trying to do with the Qantas EBA. It may be that they're trying to just continue to lung the process. Look, we write to them maybe once a fortnight and say, let's meet. And they just write back and say, oh, we can't meet at the moment. It may be that they want to get our EBA cancelled at the end of this year or sometime next year, and give us nothing. We don't know. We don't know whether they'd succeed in that, but we have already sought legal advice on the various options and where they could lead, and we've put in place provisions to defend against any unfair activities that we suspect Qantas might be embarking on. At the moment, we're calling for meetings with them every fortnight. They're just saying we can't meet, and as soon as they do, we'll be pressing for, well, at this stage, we probably would press for a 3% bare bones agreement. Who knows? They might, if Virgin collapses before anything, and there is no Virgin, and they've got a monopoly on this market, we might want a 10% pay rise. Who knows? But we're continually calling for meetings. All right, now my last thing that I have to do, just talking through all of these issues, flip back through and see if you guys got any Qantas related questions, which there's just been stacks of stuff come up on my screen, but most of it is just stuff like this. John Bursell is watching, and it's always very exciting when John Bursell is watching. I got a watching message from everyone. Al Painter's watching, good. Al's now retired and still watching, which is fantastic. Qantas specific questions, and Sunshine Pius, PC and JW in webinar said no. Not sure what I was talking about when you wrote that, Sunshine. Norm Teller, does the EBA need to be settled before redundancy is offered, and if not, what happens to back pay if Qantas exercises VR and CR without an EBA agreed upon? No. The EBA does not need to be settled before redundancy, and if not, what happens to back pay if Qantas exercises VR and CR without an EBA agreed upon? If you take VR or get CR tomorrow, and 6 months later they agree to a back pay for the last 2 or 3 years, if you have exited the business, you are not entitled to any of that. So how it works legally is that a new agreement would be put before the Fair Work Commission, and they would say, bang, that agreement is in place on this day, and if it was in 6 months' time, that's when the agreement comes in. On that day is the day that the eligibility for the back pay of the previous 2 or 3 years comes into force. So someone who's left the business are not covered by the new agreement that says you get back pay for the past period. So you miss out on that. And those guys like Al Painter who have retired from Maintenance Watch recently will not get back pay for anything, and you won't get, I don't think they'll get that Qantas bonus, their little $500 vote yes bonus. I don't think they would get back paid that either, because Qantas just aren't ethical when it comes to applying things like that fairly. One comment there that I can't really make out what it is, but I did want to talk about, and his name popping up on my screen merely prompted me to do that, is DMMs. And if you guys aren't asleep yet and are still listening to what I'm talking about, court cases, I just want to put this one in the context of that GMH decision, and how things could be viewed by the court. DMMs, wherever they come from, have been stood down as well, and generally someone would do higher duties in the DMM's position. My question for the courts would be, how can a DMM be told, we have no useful work for you, and bye-bye, go home, we're not going to pay you? And then someone comes in and does higher duties and does their job. The job that they were just told doesn't exist. So that's one example of some of the arguments we would be presenting in court. We say they are not permitted to do it, and that is a simple explanation of why we say that is so. Mick Boyd, are contractors being used in heavy maintenance? Yes, absolutely, they're using contractors in heavy maintenance. It's another one of our arguments. Is if you are telling ALAEA, say in Brisbane line, if you're telling ALAEA that we don't have anything useful for you to do, then you're going out and getting a contractor and giving him maintenance work to do. How can they legitimately say to the bloke in the first place that there was no work for you to do? These are the very arguments that we're putting forward in our useful work element of this three-pronged case. So they're using contractors. We're not trying to get the contractors removed. We're just trying to say that there's so much work that lamies in line maintenance and other areas could also be used. Dave Garvin, what's going on with grading and back pay? And Qantas admitted they owed and didn't pay. Good question. All of the lamey underpayments, that's in federal court too, and along with their usual tactics, the delay tactics and everything. This thing's been going on for 2.5 years since we first approached them and said you're not applying the lamey pay structure correctly. The federal court put in some timelines of to simplify our case, and whether you're part of the 20 or not, it doesn't really matter. It's to set precedent for everyone else. The 20 people that we've got is 10 guys who are quota exempt and 10 guys who are in lower levels who the quotas don't apply to, so you don't have to have this confusion about whether there was a vacancy in a level or not. Qantas, when you go to the federal court, there's got to be this thing called court-ordered mediation. You've got to go to a mediator first to see if you can't resolve it behind closed doors, so you don't have to waste the court's time of having the judges and that tied up in a decision and very complicated subpoena processes and everything. Court-ordered mediation, there has been an argument. The argument probably went for 1 month about what date we could get with the court-ordered mediators. And we locked in a date. We locked in a date a few weeks ago for the court-ordered mediator, and Qantas just come out and said, "Oh, sorry, things have come up. We're too busy. We can't make that mediation date." They just come out and say we can't make the date. We've got to go through mediation before we can get to the court hearing. So the federal court mediators, they set another date, and that date is in 2 days' time. It's on Monday. On Monday, we're before a court-ordered mediator to discuss the lamey underpayments, the pay levels, and whether you're going to get your back pay and where you sit in it. The mediation process, of course, won't be binding. The mediators don't make a decision on who's right or wrong. The mediators just mediate between the parties and see if they can come to an agreement to avoid a case. Every single time we go to mediation with Qantas, doesn't matter what, they never ever settle. Never. They just go to the mediation to waste time. And that's another reason, Steve, for Toulis, why they go to the federal court, is because you've got to go through court-ordered mediation that buys them 3 or 4 months. They never settle at mediation. We put reasonable offers before them, and they never do. We're going there to mediate on Monday, and then when it doesn't get solved, because they're not going to solve it. Then they'll set court dates. There'll be an argument about whether the timeline is too quick or not, and how complicated the case is. It's going to take months, Dave, before we start getting to a stage where Qantas are going to actually be forced to pay you underpayments. And one thing that, without reference to anything specific, and this is, I know you guys see me angry from time to time at meetings, and this is recorded, but I'm going to get a little bit angry here, I think. One thing that I'm starting to sense is that Qantas are going to walk into the federal court and say, particularly for the quota exempt guys, the 10 cases of guys who are quota exempt, they're going to walk into the federal court and say, quota exemptions, quota exemptions aren't in the EBA, it's in a side letter. Therefore, we haven't breached the EBA. I think they're gonna, and hello to Gwyn Davies. It's good to have Kev's son Gwyn on board. Can't wait to have a beer with Gwyn when we're allowed to go to Perth next. But I think Qantas are going to say you can't enforce a side letter, therefore anything in the side letters is not legal. I mean, they do that. It has implications for everywhere across the country. They're going to do that to avoid paying 10 people who are quota exempt the levels that they were always entitled. And some examples of the guys who are in the boat of not being paid for their correct level. Guys who are DMMs might have been level 16 for 4 years, and at the 4-year point they should have went to level 17 because they've accrued 4 points, they're quota exempt. They didn't go there in 4 years, they didn't go there in 5 years. It took them 6 years to get there. So it took them 6 years to get to the correct level, so therefore 2 years worth was not paid, and it's about 10 grand a year. So that person might have missed out on 20 grand. And Qantas are now saying, quota exemptions, they're in a side letter, they're not part of the EBA, therefore federal court, you can't enforce it, we don't owe the guy 20 grand. I think that's what they're going to say. So to your question, it's going to take a long time before we get an answer on when you're going to get paid. We win it though. We're going to be seeking massive fines for Qantas for deliberately breaching the EBA. And that's the danger for them, and it might bring a settlement on the steps of a case. We'll have to judge that at the time. Chris Sadler, Qantas EBA. I've talked about the Qantas EBA, the ALAEA EBA. Tristan Lee minus 3%. You think that makes you cry? See what else Qantas are going to try and snaffle out of this whole situation. All right, unless there's no further Qantas questions, I might just flick right back and see if there was any that I missed. I might call it a day. And thanks, I got a message from Andy. Oh, it's a private message, I shouldn't tell you what it is. No, we're just going to try and line up our meeting in Bali. I've got a very big day for me. First day for about 3 months. I'm actually going to go down to the Bowls Club at 1400 and play some lawn bowls, which I haven't been able to do, which I quite enjoy. But aside from that, I think I've covered just about everything that I've been asked, and thank you everyone who's hung in there, and for those who didn't, we'll send out a link for this and it will be posted on the ALAEA website so you can recap and hopefully next time you're back again. So thank you everyone. Bye.